Well, we can speak now to the leading pro-Brexit Conservative MP and leader of the European Research Group, Jacob Rees Mogg, who is in our Westminster studio. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. If we could just start with that report from the Institute for Government saying that whether there's a deal or no deal, the government is running out of time on the practical side of things to get things organised. Do you agree with that?
Well, in some areas, yes, I do, that it's clearly going to be a short time to implement any of the necessary legislation. It took many months to get the Withdrawal Act through, and there'll be little time for the implementation of the withdrawal bill. But in other areas, I think the government is making rapid strides, and that a number of things will be ready that aren't yet ready.
And can I ask you about the suggestion from Michael Gove, one of your colleagues, obviously one of the leading campaigners for Brexit? He says now that the best strategy is to back this Chequers arrangement put forward by Theresa May, and then a future Prime Minister could alter the nature of the relationship that the UK will have with the European Union. Do you agree with that?
I think it's classically brilliant of Michael to come up with this scheme. To suggest that Chequers isn't permanent, I don't think is the Prime Minister's policy. I think she thinks it is permanent. And then with a new Prime Minister, possibly Michael Gove, conceivably, it might all be changed. I just don't think it's realistic that we've had 2 years of negotiation. We've had endless discussions. Does Michael really think that there's going to be an appetite in the EU or in the United Kingdom to continue with the negotiations once it's been settled? I think Chequers, if Chequers is approved, which I hope it isn't, will end up being a solution for many years, not just for a short period.
So do you agree with your Prime Minister's characterisation of what she's putting on the table, that you have a choice of backing that, Parliament will have that choice, or of no deal whatsoever?
Oh no, I think that's spin. If that were the choice, I'd quite happily go for trading on World Trade Organization terms, but it would be perfectly possible for the government to go back to a Canada Plus style deal. And it's really interesting that the EU has advanced on its proposals for the border between Great Britain and the Republic of Ireland to allow much of the solution to be technological. Well, it seems to me if that works for Great Britain to the Republic of Ireland, it would work for Northern Ireland to the Republic. We made some suggestions in the ERG paper last week as to how this could be done in accordance with the EU's existing practice. And if you can unlock the Irish question, then you can go back to free trade. And I think that's a realistic option and the Prime Minister should examine it. And the spinning is unhelpful.
So do you think that even at what most people think is a relatively late stage, it is possible to effectively start again and start now by looking at a Canada-type deal, even though we only have 6 months to go before we leave?
Well, 6 months in the context of EU negotiations is a lifetime. Bear in mind that the EU managed to bail out Greece over a weekend, breaking many of its own internal rules, because necessity is the mother of invention. The EU is good at running things up to the last moment and then finding that there is a deal that can be done. It's part of the brinksmanship of negotiation, and many people predicted that the deal, the negotiations would go late in the day, because that's simply how the EU operates. It doesn't focus on a problem until it's immediate.
What about the warnings we've heard today? We've heard from Christine Lagarde from the IMF, and we've heard from the Chancellor Philip Hammond sounding pretty gloomy, particularly about the prospects for the British economy if there was to be no deal. What do you think that Philip Hammond should be focusing on now? Do you agree with him with any of his assessments? Do you think it might be a bumpy ride, or do you still think that actually the chances, the opportunities are out there and they can be seized?
Well, the IMF and the Chancellor have consistently come up with gloom and doom. The end of the world is nigh, as seems to be created in 11 Downing Street and with Christine Lagarde, and they've been wrong consistently, and I expect they'll continue to be wrong. We want to be talking about the great opportunities. We can have cheaper food, clothing and footwear when we're not subject to the high tariffs imposed by the European Union. We can increase our trade with the rest of the world. We can reduce the cost of goods coming into this country, improving the standard of living, particularly of the least well off. This is a really exciting opportunity, but I'm afraid the Chancellor never wanted Brexit to happen. He was Foreign Secretary when his side of the argument lost, and he's done nothing but moan ever since. Some people have called him Eeyore because of this, and that may be fair enough.
Do you think Theresa May should sack him from his job?
That's a matter for her. I'm a backbench MP. It's not for me to say who the Prime Minister should ask to hold high office.
What about those warnings from Jaguar Land Rover? One of your colleagues, Bernard Jenkins, said this morning effectively that the head of that company was making up the suggestion that actually a no-deal Brexit could lead to thousands of job losses.
Well, I think it was an odd thing for Jaguar Land Rover to say. Bear in mind, just-in-time delivery happens outside the European Union, across international boundaries. I think 21% of car components come into this country from outside the European Union on a just-in-time basis, that Jaguar Land Rover does the majority of its sales outside the European Union, and its fastest growth has been to countries like China and India. It's been doing much better there than in a stagnant European market. So I think the supply chain issue is one that is a question of how efficient the UK ports are, and goods come through Southampton from outside the European Union in 6 seconds. So I don't think it's a realistic suggestion. I think it's unduly nervous.
OK, Jacob Rees Mogg, thank you very much for joining us here this afternoon.